Welcome to Fridays with the Forester. Today is Friday, February 20th, 2026, Participatory Science 2025, and also we're talking about the new projects for 2026. The hosts today are myself, Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator with our forestry team based out of the Mankato Regional Office, and Lauren Beckus, Regional Support Staff out of Andover Regional Office in Minnesota. So today's topic and speakers of Participatory Science 2025 projects, and then also talk about the new projects for 2026 year. Angela Gupta, Extension Educator in Forestry, part of our forestry team as well. And you see her email there. I'll show that again at the end of the presentations. Hannah Kim, Extension Educator in Invasive Species, is also part of the presentation today. And we welcome her. She's been with our Extension team, forestry team for a couple of years now. So details of today's webinar. It is a webinar. We don't see everybody's faces, but do enter the questions that you have in the Q&A. And our forestry team will be putting in links to the chat periodically that Hannah and Angie will be addressing. And yeah, so address your questions in the Q&A, please. All of our webinars are recorded on zlink, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And Angela and Kim, you can start sharing. I'll stop and we'll transition. Looks good. Full screen.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Lauren. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here today and joining our session on participatory science. Today, Angie and I will be bouncing back and forth, so you'll hear from both of us. We'll be going through our results from 2025 and then looking forward to our projects in 2026. And this is just in time for National Invasive Species Awareness Week, which just so happens to be next week. We can move forward. Awesome. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, I'll just go ahead and read this off. The Terrestrial Invasive Species Participatory Science Program, that's quite the mouthful, empowers volunteers, landowners, and natural resource professionals to collaboratively address forest health challenges through participatory science, reducing invasive species impacts, and fostering resilient ecosystems while bridging research and community action. So, like this kind of says, this program couldn't run with awesome people like you in the community helping us out. As being part of the TIPS program, you collect data that can inform researchers and natural resources professionals on the spread and density of invasive species, and by possibly identifying areas that may need to be managed in order to prevent further harm or spread of these species. So you can see in the chat here, Peter dropped in our webpage that has more information about the program. It also has all of our completed projects. So you can see on the screen here, these are our 2025 projects that we'll be going through today. We are going to start off with jumping worms. So in 2025, there were 26 new reports of jumping worms on EDDMapS. And if you're unfamiliar, we'll be referring to EDDMapS quite a few times today. That stands for Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. It is a free website and app to use. This map shown on the slide, those are all of the areas that the jumping worms were reported in 2025. I believe there's 22 there. That's just because sometimes the public doesn't get full access to locations sometimes with reports, but you can see that they were all around the metro area. And Extension is also a part of a research project in collaboration with a research team at the University of Minnesota. We're working on a project that's funded by the Minnesota Invasive Plants and Pests Center, and it's also funded by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. We are looking at collecting more information and data on erosion that jumping worms may induce on forested hill slopes in Minnesota. And we're also just hoping to get more information out there about jumping worms and spreading that awareness, because this species is one that can easily be spread by humans. And so while the team is still working on analyzing the data that we collected from last year, we can say that, yep, we are seeing erosion on these hill slopes, and we will share more as that progresses. Next, our project on lesser celandine. So, lesser celandine is a restricted noxious weed. It's also a spring ephemeral, so you may be hearing about it soon in a couple months here. There were 4 new observations of lesser celandine in 2025. 2 of them were in the same area. So, we're looking at 3 areas or populations. However, these were already known and documented from previous years, and they are being actively monitored, managed, and treated. And the managers of those areas are making sure that it is being contained. So even with the new reports, we can see that there is no evidence as further spread. Stiltgrass is another one that we were looking out for. And stiltgrass is a prohibited eradicate noxious weed. You can see that it thrives in moist and partially shaded forests. This is a good picture of that here. In great news, there were no reports of stiltgrass in Minnesota, which is fantastic because that means that none of it has been found so far within the state. However, I do want to note that a couple of years ago in our neighboring state, Wisconsin, there was a population found in La Crosse, which is just across the river from us. So that's why we want to be so aware and keep our eyes out for it. And in 2025, there were also populations found in southern Wisconsin. These populations were found on private property, and it seemed to have been there for a couple of years because it was thriving on their land, just like in this picture here. So that just speaks to how important it is for landowners to be aware of what's on their property and to be informed on priority invasive species.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. I think it's me now. So calorie pair. Delighted with all the good news this year. So this is another one. There was only one new verified report of escaped calorie pair in 2024 and 25 combined. And just a little background, calorie pair is a horticultural plant planted in communities. And it has proven to be quite aggressive and invasive further southeast. So we want to pay attention to it here. So that means there are a total of 3 known escaped trees in the state. So that is a very low number, which we're delighted by. There are 50 verified observations of calorie pear in iNaturalist. So that means there are 50 verified trees in community. So think yards and boulevards and parks. And so those would be high priority areas in which to survey around to look for escaped calorie pear. But generally, very good news that we found only one new report of escaped calorie pear, and that means a total of only 3 in the state. So we want to keep this on folks' radar. If you see it out and about in natural areas, please report it to EdMaps. But generally, we feel like it is not out of control yet, and we have a good handle on where it is so we can monitor it. Also good news, malice. So malice, beloved apples. But there is an apple that is showing signs of escaping. It is a crabapple species, but we know that identifying escaped apples, crab and traditional, are very, very hard once they get out of domestication. So our project was looking for any escaped apple that was not native. We have only one native prairie crabapple, and it really does present pretty differently. So the good news, we found no new reports. There are 2 verified reports in EdMaps of the Siberian crabapple. So those have been recorded and documented, but there's no obvious spread of other non-native malice species in the state. So as with calorie pear, please keep your eyes open. If you see any escape in the wild, please report those to EdMaps. But for now, we're feeling pretty good about the state of the state, and we will keep our eyes open. So winsome fly on Japanese beetle. This is a biocontrol project. This is the second of 3 years. So we have data from 2024 and 2025. Just to get us grounded, so Japanese beetles are an invasive beetle that can be quite troublesome in yard and gardens, on boulevard trees. They have quite a large host range, number of species on which they can defoliate. And there is this this little tiny fly larvae, that's what you're looking at right there, that parasitize Japanese beetles. And so that larvae is called winsome fly larvae. A winsome fly and the larvae is here. And so this project is asking people to report winsome fly on Japanese beetle. So first, you got to know how to ID a Japanese beetle. Then you have to look at it closely enough to see that little larvae. And people have been doing it very successfully. So macro numbers in combined 2024-25 in Minnesota, there have been 14 new counties that we have observed and documented winsome fly on. That's great. 7 new counties in 2025 alone. Wisconsin, there have been 11 new counties, 6 in 2025, and Iowa, there are 3 new counties. So what that means is this biocontrol fly is moving on its own and finding Japanese beetles in new counties. So that is generally good news from a biocontrol perspective. 95% of the reports for winsome fly were in the month of July. That is what the research had indicated. So that is what we're seeing in the field. And then there is a 10 to 50% parasitism rate. So that means that when they're being found, they're parasitizing the Japanese beetles at a rate of 10 to 50%. So that's good. And then 80% parasitism where it has been in release for the longest. And these rates are like, if you look at the population of Japanese beetles, then these are the population of beetles with the winsome fly on them. So 80% parasitism is really great. That means it is actually likely to keep that troublesome pest in control. And that site is here in the Twin Cities metro area of Minnesota. So exciting data. You can see that distribution map that's been updated from 2025 data. So this project has 1 more year, so it will continue to plug along, but we are feeling good about that. Feral swine, another good news report. So feral swine, there are populations of breeding feral swine in Canada on the near the Minnesota border. And so we are worried about them. And there are 2 primary messages here. If you see them, do not shoot them. Please report them very quickly to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Those are the 2 primary messages. So this past year, we really tried to get the word out, particularly people looking at trail cams, like maybe around deer season. If you see any of these, please report them. So the good news is there were no reports of feral swine in the state in 2025. And I was reminded from the DNR that there have been no reports of feral swine in the last 10 years. So domestic swine, domestic pigs that have been escaped, or pet pigs like potbelly that have escaped, those are altogether different. They're regulated and handled differently. So those are not what we considered feral. So when we look just at feral swine, good news, there's no reports in the state. As with all these others, if you were to find them, do not shoot them, report them very quickly to Department of Natural Resources. It is a recent progression of sort of policy that it is going to be the purview of the Department of Natural Resources in collaboration with Animal Health and Vet Med and some other places to ramp up their reporting and outreach efforts and to sort of consolidate and organize how they're going to approach feral swine in the state of Minnesota. So I understand they will be launching a new app for reporting. As soon as that is available, we will be sure to push that out so people know the best way to report that. So good news again. And then 4 projects, we've already heard about all of them, will continue in 2026. So just know that Hannah will continue to ask for information related to jumping worms. I will continue to push out information related to winsome fly. We will continue to push out information related to lesser celandine, that spring ephemeral, and then still grass. So just heads up, those are very high on our radar, and we will be pushing information out for you. So then we're going to transition to new projects for 2026. So these are species that may be unusual or reframed a bit. So I'll talk quickly about angelica tree, golden oyster mushroom, and then I'll hand it back to Hannah for big leaf lupine and porcelain berry. Which porcelain berry is making a repeat visit. We talked about it first in 2022, but we're worried about it enough that we're going to highlight it again. All right, angelica tree. This is a known invasive further east and south of Minnesota. It is an interesting tree to be planted in horticulture. I'll just share that. It is a very aggressive non-native. It can spread very successfully through the roots, and it has berries that can spread around with birds. It is pretty conspicuous. It has the largest leaf size in temperate North America. So These are an individual leaf, and they are compound or doubly compound. And so here you see them here, like that is all a single leaf, and these individuals are leaflets. So it is quite large, a little conspicuous. And then it has spines. I mean, it's quite spiny. You can see the trunk is spiny. The actual twigs themselves are spiny, and then there are actually spines on the leaves. It has a native cousin further south and east of Minnesota called Devil's Walking Stick. So that is a reference to just how pokey and painful this plant is. So it's an interesting choice for horticulture. But if you were to see it, please, please, please report it to EdMaps. We do not want it in the state of Minnesota. It is currently not regulated. So part of this is to understand if it is here, distribution and density, to potentially get it regulated. This is the first time I've talked about a mushroom, an edible mushroom, as a tip species, but we're going to ask folks to report golden oyster mushroom. So this is a mushroom that you can buy mushroom grow kits online and have them delivered to your house and grow these mushrooms. They're edible, they're easy to propagate, and we suspect that's part of how they have managed to escape. They are very aggressive. They are non-native. There's research out of University of Wisconsin-Madison that they are displacing suite of native mushrooms when they colonize these logs. And so that is a type of aggressive behavior common in invasive species. So there are many oyster mushrooms in the world, but not many that are confused with this. So we don't have good lookalikes, but we do know that it's golden in color. It has this depression in the middle of the cap that's quite indicative. And then the stems themselves, they bend or they are curved. That's very indicative to have that curved stem. So if you see this, because it's not being treated as an invasive at the state level yet, we want all reports to iNaturalist. And we're most interested in reports in northern and western Minnesota. It's pretty well reported in southeast and the Twin Cities, but there are no reports in northern Minnesota and western. So really want people to be on the lookout for that. All right, now I'm going to turn it back to Hannah.
Thanks, Angie. So, big leaf lupine, this is one that many of you might be familiar with already, especially if you spend a lot of time up along the Lake Superior North Shore. This map has pulled all of the observations from EdMaps, and you can see that there are a lot of observations concentrated in the Arrowhead region of Minnesota up there. So, big leaf lupine has these big or taller, showy, and vibrant violet, blue, sometimes pink blooms. We are particularly interested in escaped populations or those that are in the wild and were not intentionally planted in home gardens or home landscapes. That is how it has gotten its start in Minnesota here by being planted in home gardens and such, but we are interested in these escaped populations being reported to EdMaps. And last but not least, Angie mentioned that porcelain berry was asked to be looked at in 2022, and we are bringing it back after consulting with our partners, state agencies, researchers, people like that in the field. And porcelain berry is a restricted noxious weed as well in Minnesota. It is an aggressive, non-native, woody vine that often is climbing up trees and shrubs, structures such as fences, maybe even buildings. And you'll probably notice if there's an infestation with just the amount of vines climbing up a tree on your property or something like that. But in the fall too, you'll see that the berries are a very vibrant color. It almost looks odd to find berries colored like this, but we are also asking that you report these to EdMaps.
All right, it's me. So this is my slide about eco-anxiety. So I just want to mention that about 68% of U.S. adults have experienced a little bit of eco-anxiety. So if you find yourself in this group, please know that you're not alone. I also want to mention that what is eco-anxiety? It is extreme anxiety about the future of the ecosystem and commonly related to human activity, whether that's invasive species or climate or floods or tornadoes or blizzards, those extreme weather events. And I also want to give a shout out to research at the Mayo Clinic that just pictures of nature and water can be very healing. So if you find yourself in a room without a lot of windows or no access to nature, even a poster on the wall can help you, when you look at it, calm down and relax. So just these little things that can help us keep us resilient as humans so we can nurture resilient landscapes. And with that, I want to invite everyone to stand up. If I stand up, you look at my tummy, and that's weird. So if you guys want to stand up and jiggle and wiggle, it's a little bit early in the day. Han and I have been throwing a lot at you. Then we're going to do this mental flourishing exercise. We'll do it once as a group, and then I want you to do it once individually. It's called Brax breathing. We're going to breathe in slowly for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now do it one time by yourself. And if you're standing, you can sit back down. I want you to take just a moment to reflect upon how you feel after that very short break. And then I want to just point out that the QR code, and maybe my colleagues will drop the link into to the chat, but we do have great resources on the University of Minnesota Extension website about eco-anxiety. If that's something you want to explore or share with others, feel free. And now we're going to transition to Climate Ready Woods Participatory Science. And I will review 2025 data. When I gave this Fridays with a Forester presentation last year, we actually didn't have all the data ready, so I'll share that. Similarly, though, we don't have 2026's data ready. So I'll share what I know, and then just know that all 3 of these projects, so Tree Steward Journal, Tree Tracker, and INAT Verifier, will continue actually for 3 more years. We were successful in getting an LCCMR grant, and so we have additional resources to help us move that work forward. So this is data from 2024 that wasn't terribly available last year. So we had 118 volunteers intentionally sign up for the project. We had 3 plus 5 students that worked as INAT verifiers. We had a total of 271 identifiers in iNaturalist, so you can see that number here. And these can be anyone in the iNaturalist community. They certainly do not have to have committed to our project. So grateful for that community as a whole. There were 1,200 observers that submitted over getting close to 4,000 observations in 2024. And that was a total of 31 of the 56 species that we were keen to learn more about in their new ecoregions. So that was 2024 data. You can see what that data looks like on a plot map. So the light gray plots, those are species of interest, but not in areas of interest. So the example I like to use is Eastern black walnut is considered native in southern Minnesota. So while these points might be Eastern black walnut, we frankly don't care about them. We know it does well. It's a great wildlife species, all the things. Up in the Arrowhead, northern Minnesota, we are keen to learn about it because it is considered a near native. So a species that's projected to do well in the future climate, but not considered native. And so the same species here would be a gray dot and would be a red dot up here. We found over 3,000 research grade submissions. So that means that there's 2 points of agreement in verification. There were 318 participatory science in total that contributed. And so new to region species, those that the species in the areas that we're really considering and interested in, 231. So that's exciting. That's exciting from 2024. We also found some evidence of rewilding, which is a fundamental principle of this idea that these species that are near native can help contribute to the ecosystem, often through interaction with wildlife, being that insects, pollinators, small mammals, or birds. So I love this example. It's of an eastern black walnut. And so the example I'm going to look at, here's the native range. Here are two that were reported in iNaturalist. And you can see once we got into those reports, this one way up north in the Superior forest, you can see the herbivory. So that is a sign of rewilding. So not only is there a black walnut way up north, but it is large enough to reproduce. So that means it can survive till it gets to reproductive age. And then those seeds are being used by wildlife. So it's a great example of rewilding in real time. And so, and I love iNaturalist. You're going to see another one of these comments, but there was a comment from one of the verifiers with the community. Do you know whether this source of this tree could have been planted? And it's a really great question. It can matter for how it shows up in our data and how it's reported. For our purposes in the Climate Ready Woods project, we don't care. So whether it was planted or it showed up on their own, we are just interested in survival, distribution, and some other attributes. So this project on iNaturalist carries data forward year over year. And so this is cumulative data from both 2024 and 25 as presented by the platform. And you can see, holy buckets, we're over 9,000 observations now, representing 31 out of 30, was it? Well, I can't remember how many species, but 31 species. And then a total of 17,000 identifications. And remember, each of these observations needs to get multiple identifications before it's considered research grade. So that's why you get a bigger number there. Also, just want to point out, we have 567 different identifiers, so way more than who have committed to volunteer for me. It's because of that community platform. And then again, way more than have committed to volunteer are submitting data that we find useful. So getting close to 3,000 observers there. So this is the list. If you want to get up close and personal with this list and what region and what trees, here is the QR code. All things are going to be reported to iNaturalist. And you don't need to worry about reporting it to the Tree Tracker project. The way the project is set up is any report of those species in the state will be scooped into our data. On the back side, we'll do geolocation stuff to get it to the ecoregion we care about. So all you need to do is just report these species in those areas that we're interested in. A different component of this project is the Tree Steward Journal. So again, all of this data is from 2024. This is a big, heavy lift to crunch the data because it is narrative data. So you have to code it, sort it. It's a heavy lift. But we have 2024 data. So collected between April and December. This is data that was collected from people who have these near natives in these ecoregions of interest on parcels in which they are owned and steward, or they're volunteers and steward. And so we see this picture of a mature sycamore in Rochester. And so that tree has clearly been there for a long time. There's seed, so evidence of reproduction, or at least seed generation. And so we have that site is a part of our project. You can see here beautiful maps, hand drawn with all of the data around it. So lots of time and energy went into some of these parcels, which we're really, really grateful for. This map on the right is the distribution. So we had 10 volunteers submit information about 11 different parcels. And so you can see it's not a lot of data. It's not a lot of individual. The N value is low, but the distribution is good and the quality of data is good. So here you can see the different types of sites this represents. So you can see 18% were urban, 9% were urban parks, 27% were suburban, rural woodlots were 27%, and rural yards were 18%. So actually a good distribution of types of locations across the state. Now you can see more people expressed interest than actually submitted useful journals. And this does not cause me a lot of heartache. I think people struggle to realize I actually am hoping people will type and write. It's a narration, so I'm hoping for full sentences and paragraphs. And then life gets busy and people can't participate, and that is absolutely fine. So they're not excluded from the program, they're not barred, they're not banned. Hopefully this year it'll work for them. Hopefully they submitted data in 2025. But it's exciting to see that level of interest. And then it's also important to remember, in order to even qualify for this program, you need to have these species of interest in the area of interest, and you need to be actively stewarding them. So that is a small subset of landowners and stewards in the state of Minnesota by itself. So this is just not going to be a huge data set. But there's great information coming out. So these are two different examples from two different reports. So I'll read this quote on the left. So this came from a yard tree steward in Pine River. It is so absolutely cool to be able to see something grow from a seed into a beautiful tree. I would even enjoy getting them started and giving them away to encourage others to try. I really do believe that we can make a difference if we try. And this observation on the right, I share it because I think it's so lovely. There's before, so this is Eastern redbud. It blooms very early in the spring. So you can see clearly it is already blooming. They're using protection, presumably for herbivory like deer and rabbits, probably rabbits in this case. And then you can see they revisited in the fall and they told us about it. So that's exactly the type of data we're hoping for. Other examples, so again, I'll read the quote on the right from a woodland tree steward in Newport. So even mundane species that are common here but weren't in our woods, like blue beech, ironwood, and hackberry, have been fun to plant and observe. The reward is a combination of intellectual curiosity to learn about new species and pure enjoyment in their beauty. And then yet a different journalist on the right really spent a lot of time on fencing, protecting those woodland trees from, in this case, I think it's deer and probably rabbit as well. And you can see they tried lots of different fencing. They were able to tell us about it, offer insight on what worked and what didn't. And so you can see the type of information is different, but we're collecting it all and trying to learn. And some key questions that we want to know are like, again, we're learning distribution and density. So where are they and how many in that tree tracker? But here we want to learn, what does it take to steward them? Are you seeing signs of rewilding, of herbivory, of wildlife use? Are you seeing signs of aggressive escape that might be indicators of invasive tendencies? So and then what are you doing? Are you seeing survival? What if you're not seeing survival, if you're seeing mortality, what is killing them? I think for a long time we assumed that climate, Minnesota's cold winters, would be the thing that kills the trees. And what we're actually learning is if you don't protect them, the deer and the rabbits eat them. So that's a different issue. It is also, interestingly, a sign of rewilding. So if we want these new to area species to establish and be productive, we might have to do greater stewardship in order to get them to a size in which they can be released and not, be eaten by the thing. So it's interesting. We are starting to learn some things, and we'll continue to share what we learn. So I have this general data for 2025, but no actual journal data. So 46 volunteers signed up to participate in 2025. So that's a significant increase from last year. Interestingly, exact same number, 23 men, 23 women, and 2 chose not to answer, 91% white or Caucasian. That's kind of all the data I can really glean from the sign up form, and we'll push out the rest when we get those journals reviewed and get the information ready for you. I want to say we have 7. This is up from 3 in 2024 who are committed volunteers just to do iNaturalist verification. And when you have close to 10,000 observations, this is a heavy lift. Now, again, not all of those observations are keen because, if black walnuts in southeast Minnesota, I don't care about it. It's not a high priority for observations, but it's a heavy lift. So we're trying to clear the deck from all 2025 reports for the Tree Tracker project here at the end of February. So I spent some time yesterday, and the only species for which we have a really significant backlog, I cleared all the others, is swamp white oak. And there's about 160 unverified trees because we just haven't had the capacity to get through them. So we might have another verification party and really plow through that. But that's an interesting species in that oaks, trying to differentiate oaks to species can be quite hard. There's swamp white oak, there's white oak, there's chinkapin oak. There's a number of oaks that look similar. And swamp white oak is being sold and planted in communities. So there's actually quite a lot of it potentially out there. So we'll get it done. I'm confident, but I'm so grateful for the committed volunteers. And I have to say, as we were going through it and trying to clear the stacks, it was so lovely to kind of see our volunteers in the real world. So you can see here is someone reported a sycamore, and then you can see, oh, but it might be a London plane tree. Let's chat about it. And then you can see this report. I just love it. So this is our person. It's either a student at the U or one of our dedicated volunteers. Hello, can you provide a few more pictures? Pictures of the whole tree, leaves, twigs, where the leaves join, fruit and or flower pictures are the most useful for identification. I'm with the University of Minnesota and we're really interested in this species for our Climate Woody Woodlands project with a link. Makes my heart so happy. It's like seeing your kids in the real world acting like competent humans. So really grateful for these volunteers that are committing their time to help us get this work done. And then as we were clearing out the stacks, this unexpected note showed up. So this is another, I was doing sycamore. Um, this note, this American sycamore was part of NASA's Moon Tree program. It was planted in May 2024, suffered transplant shock, but bounced back beautifully this spring. So I looked up what that means, and NASA sent a bunch of seeds to the moon and brought them back and then distributed them through this Moon Tree program. So very unexpectedly, one of our species of interest in an area of interest is American sycamore. And it turns out this particular plant went to the moon and back. So I thought that was a super fun, unexpected outcome. All right, so with that, I'm winding down with plenty of time for questions. I want to give a huge shout out. We do have support. Hannah's jumping worm work is supported by the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plant and Pest Center with funds from the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. The Climate Ready Woods, the 3-year funding source we just got, so we're about 6 months into that, is also from the Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund. And then such a lovely collaboration with the U4, our urban forestry colleagues at the university. And this picture here on the right is another example of rewilding from the Twin Cities campus, where we intentionally planted a bunch of these near native species. We didn't get them in the ground when we hoped in spring, and so they end up coming into the state bare root, getting put into soil so we could keep them through the summer. We planted them in the fall, and as we were doing that, one of the students that was helping us discovered mycorrhizal fungi on a post oak. So really wonderful to see the post oak, not considered native, a near native in Minnesota, being colonized by mycorrhizal fungi from the state. So again, great evidence of rewilding. We do have time for questions, but I really like to end my questions or to do my questions with this slide in the background. I just want to remind everyone we can make a difference. Sometimes invasive species in particular can feel overwhelming, but I just want to share in 2020 when the world closed because of COVID, my boys and I went to the woods and started removing invasive plants at this park near my house. You can see in the spring of 2020, it was pretty much a mess of invasive plants. By a year later, you can see all the Virginia bluebells coming up. By spring of 2024, the whole understory is covered in Virginia bluebells. All of those came up on their own. And by the fall of 24, you can see the white snake group, another climate ready native understory species, likely to do well in our future climate. This is also a tree steward general project. So the sycamore tree that you saw earlier came from the same urban woodland city park. So we can make a difference. I don't want us to get overwhelmed by the challenges ahead. Know that you can all make a difference. So with that, I will stop and I hope Hannah will unmute and then Lauren and Gary can feed us questions.
Yes, Angie, why don't you keep your slides up just in case you need to go back for one of the questions?
I will.
And
Thanks.
I'll start asking the questions here real quickly. If I can find the top of the screen here. Let's see. If golden oyster mushrooms are classified as invasive, which, let's see, in parentheses, which they are likely to native fungi, is there any best practice that forest managers should do with them? And then eating them is fun, but most of the mushroom isn't the edible part.
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks for asking. It's a super great question. So let's take the first part. So if it would be classified as invasive, the honest truth of the matter is in Minnesota, we have never experienced an invasive edible mushroom before. And so we don't have good precedence or approach to regulate it in policy. We do have policy related to like oak quilts, which is mycorrhizal fungi, but it's very different. So I will share that our colleagues in the invasive species world don't, they're not particularly persuaded it will be regulated. And we don't regulate plenty of non-native aggressive species. So um, sometimes I wish we would, but we don't. Like currently, we don't regulate creeping bellflower. We don't regulate dandelions, for example. Mullein isn't regulated. And so um, we don't know that it'll be regulated. Your question, though, about what to do. So if you want to eat it and harvest it, that's fine. It's not clear that will reduce the population. So I don't know that that's really management. Any forager entering our woodlands or any natural area, please use best practices for invasive species prevention. So go in with gear, clean your gear, including your shoes and anything else before you leave the site. If you see a known invasive, please report it. EdMaps is the place to do it, including golden oyster mushroom. Um, so I did listen to a presentation last Friday in which the researcher from Wisconsin gave, and she was asked this very similar question. And she said the only likely way to truly get rid of the mushroom is to burn it. But I would say for most managers, that's fairly impractical. As you can maybe saw from the images, it commonly grows on standing snags. And so burning those without burning the whole forest is not likely to happen. And then down woody material, you might do that in a prescribed burn, but I don't think you would intentionally do that to manage golden oyster mushroom. So this is one of those species where I think we really just want to understand what's happening, but we might not do a lot of management interventions around it. So kind of a bummer. Thanks for
Thank you.
asking. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Please answer your questions in the Q&A, please. Question on feral pigs. And actually, my cousin just recently went down from Missouri, he lives in Missouri, to Texas. And actually, they have hunting preserves on feral pigs, which is pretty interesting. Why shouldn't the feral pigs be shot? Question, just curious.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked. So, feral pigs are incredibly smart, and they live in community. And so, what happens when you shoot them or shoot at them is they very, very quickly, like one interaction, will learn to avoid humans. And so, a group of pigs is called a sounder. And if you shoot, let's say, so it is common to see a group of pigs together. And when you see a group of pigs, if you shoot at them, whether you hit it or not, what happens is the sounder tends to split up and run and scatter. And they become very hard to capture, to trap, to kill, to find, because they will very quickly learn to avoid humans. And you maybe went from one sounder, let's say, of 8 to 20 pigs, and now you might end up with two or four different sounders. And so now instead of having one group to trap or to shoot or to whatever to manage, you might have two or four. And so you can just see how that becomes sort of an exponential problem. So, but Gary is right. One of the modes of introduction is people intentionally moving them around and releasing them as game animals. So that is not legal in the state of Minnesota. Any pig outside of captivity for 24 hours will be taken care of in the state of Minnesota. So it is illegal to bring up feral swine and release them. If you're a potbelly pig, you want to find your pig quick, or potbelly pig owner. And if you have domestic pigs, it is your responsibility to keep them contained. And so the state of Minnesota takes pigs pretty seriously. There's a lot of disease transfer with humans with pigs. So it's not just feral swine and invasiveness that we're worried about, but disease transfer among pigs and among humans is a big deal. So it's actually really complicated at the regulatory level. So the message that we want to get out is do not shoot them and report them ASAP. And part of the reason for the fast reporting is they're on the move, right? I mean, this isn't like a plant where it literally stays put and I can wander out a week later and hopefully find it unless it's ephemeral and it's sort of disappeared in the landscape. But pigs will happily run away. And so it's important that managers can get out quickly and confirm a report because they won't do it with just a picture. Great question. Thank you.
Another question on Japanese knotweed. What is the status of Japanese knotweed?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Hana pulled up its regulatory status. I think it's on. Did you do that? Yay. Good
I
job, Hannah.
did,
Go.
yes. Japanese knotweed is a prohibited control noxious weed. And I will drop the list or the link to the list in the chat here.
Very good, Hannah. I was just going to suggest that. Actually, if you own property in Minnesota, you are obligated to follow the Minnesota noxious weed law, and especially the eradicate list and the control list. So landowners should know those lists. Another question. I have something, a master gardener called Quill. They are pretty in the spring, but should I remove them?
I think you might have squill. And
I
squills
think
are
you're right.
spring ephemerals. And if you can, that'd be great. They're not a regulated species. They are a species of concern. We've run projects, participatory science projects around them before. They are on the move. They come out of plantings. The trick with squill is that they have their bulb, so think like a tulip, but they also produce a seed, and they regenerate very well from both the bulbs and the seeds. So you can mow them aggressively. They're ephemeral, right? So they come up in the spring. They're one of the very earliest plants to come up. They're very small and delicate, and they have a very noticeable purple flower. So you can try really hard to like mow them or cut them so they don't go to seed, but you also have to manage the below ground root to actually prevent spread. So if you have a small area and you can do this, please do, because they will continue to spread and they can be quite aggressive. I will tell you from an invasive species perspective, if they take over your yard, we kind of don't really care. But if they take over the woodlot or the adjacent park, we do care, and we have no good management tools for them. So if you're near an adjacent to a natural area, it would be a higher priority for us for you to at least try, although it's not required because it's not a regulated species. So it's an example of one of those that it may never be regulated. One of the challenges with that is figuring out what the ecological, or economic, or human health harm is for a spring ephemeral. And there's just not a lot of data on that. Like we think it's out competing other spring ephemerals, but spring ephemerals, because of their ephemeral nature, they bloom and then they functionally disappear from the landscape very quickly, are very tricky to study. And so it has not met the bar to be regulated as an invasive plant in Minnesota. But great question. And it's one of the species where we're hoping that people asking that question, the noxious weed list reviewing the species, might prompt research about management. But thus far, there has been none. So we're a little stymied with management as well. Thanks.
Next question. On Siberian crabapple. Is Siberian crabapple sold in nurseries anywhere in the country? And what about its rootstock?
Yes, and yes.
What
So
is it?
yeah, the crab. I don't. I don't think any of the crab apples are regulated as invasive in the United States yet. So what we are noticing is escaping, and that is concern. But apples and crab apples are beloved, and they're commonly sold. So you asked specifically about Siberian. I don't know how commonly that's sold in Minnesota or in the upper Midwest, crab apples in general. And again, there's only one crab apple we think that is showing significant signs of invasiveness, but it's really hard to get. So once so you plant a species, and as this questioner alluded, in horticulture, they're commonly from a different rootstock. So the way in which you keep traits the same, and thus you can advertise beautiful pink blooms, is that you have the same genetic material that you cut and you graft on to, let's say, a very easy to propagate plant stock. But the rooting stock isn't necessarily same as the top stock, right? Um, so there was just yesterday, I was watching a webinar for the 2026 Invasive Species Forum, and they were looking at a type of magnolia, and they were struggling to get even the genetic data sorted out. And they realized that this one plant, that this mature tree, had two different flowering colors. And it's because one branch of the rootstock had grown and matured, and then another branch of the grafted stock had grown and matured. And so once they realized, they started to understand why they were having such trouble. Um, so back to apples. So I do not think they're regulated. I do think they're generally still sold, and they're very, very hard to figure out. So they've been trying to do some genetic testing on the ones that have escaped and try to figure it out. But because so many of the cultivars are crossbreeds, and there is some evidence of hybridization in nature, that is proving very difficult. So what we want is for people to be on the lookout for escaped apples and report them. And as I always say, if you have the opportunity to plant a new tree, please plant a native or near native. And so there are many beautiful flowering native and near natives that you could plant instead of a crabapple. So I hopefully I answered that question.
Yes. Next question regarding iNaturalist and EdMaps. How do you know when to use iNaturalist or EdMaps for observations?
Excellent question. So some of our projects, because they're not considered invasive, we say just report them to iNaturalist. Because as you can imagine, and for the near natives, I think it's inappropriate fully to report them to EdMap. So, but you can also imagine that people in horticulture don't love it when we frame things as invasive and send you to EdMap straight away. So we want to be really careful about that. I use iNaturalist all the time to help me with identification. So when I'm out in the woods, during the growing season in particular, and I don't know something, or maybe I just haven't noticed that plant in that stage of its life really early on or later, I haven't really noticed the seed before, I nat it. And that's the first thing I do. And then iNaturalist tends to, I mean, it'll tell you right there if it's native or non-native. If there's a little bar that says it's considered invasive in some spaces, soon as I see an indicator of non-nativeness, and really invasiveness, I will then duplicate report that into EdMaps, right? So I mean, so I know a lot of plants. So when I know it's an invasive, I'll just report it directly to EdMaps. If I'm uncertain, I'll do the INAT report. And then if it says it's invasive, then I'll do another report to EdMaps. The reason we ask you to do the second report to EdMaps is EdMaps has professional verifiers, myself, others at the Department of Ag and Natural Resources that are assigned to do verification. So it's a high level of confidence with those verifications, and it happens quickly. If you put it in iNaturalist, they are great at verification, but they're not necessarily all professionals. And it doesn't show up in our professional radar as quickly. So it goes to iNaturalist. For some species, we actually pull the information from iNaturalist to EdMaps because we don't want to miss stuff, but it's like a monthly pull. It's not an immediate pull. In EdMaps, an email is generated immediately, or maybe it comes into my inbox at the beginning of every day. Good question.
Here's a question on Siberian elm. What is the status of Siberian elm?
Hannah, I don't think that's regulated, but did you happen to look it up?
Yep, I did, and it is currently not regulated.
Okay. So thanks, Hannah. Yeah, so Siberian elm is a non-native elm that was planted because it is considered dust elm disease resistant, and it definitely has shown significant signs of escaping. So I don't I think it has been reviewed by the Minnesota Noxious Weed Committee. So, the Minnesota Noxious Weed Committee is a bunch of professionals and researchers that review the species that might then show up on the Minnesota Noxious Weed list. The committee does really detailed assessments. So, looking at is it likely to grow in Minnesota? Has it been proven invasive elsewhere? Does it meet that threshold of causing economic, ecological, or human health harm? And then the noxious weed committee recommends things be added or moved around the noxious weed list. And then that recommendation goes to the Commissioner of Agriculture. And it is that individual's decision whether to change the state statute or not. The state statute is then what is enforced by the Minnesota Department of Ag. So I am pretty confident that Siberian elm has been reviewed by the noxious weed committee. Um, and I don't frankly remember where it landed, but it did not land on the noxious weed list. I do want to say that our participatory science projects and just you as community members can influence what the noxious weed committee reviews, and they will review species. So several species have come up multiple times as new information has come out, or as our projects have yielded greater impact in the state. So there's more of it than is around. And then the Noxious Weed Committee will elevate it, they'll redo the assessment, and then they'll offer recommendations again. So if you think that they should review Siberian elm again, please go to the Minnesota Noxious Weed Committee, and I think you can submit a report and you can say, look, do that again. I see it all the time. I'm really worried about it. That is also one way you can help influence the species we highlight here in tips. So great question.
So Angie, can you stop sharing and I'll end
I
with some
can.
closing slides here. Slide 2 and forward that. So thank you again, Angie and Hannah, for presenting today. Excellent presentation. I love it. So much going on and around everybody's woods in Minnesota. So do take some participatory science tips and try and participate in some of those programs that Angie and Hannah are leading. All of our recordings are recorded at the Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. This is our list of our Fridays with a Forester list going out to April 22nd or 24th. And we'll see you next week. If you're interested in attending the Minnesota Family Woodlands Conference, I guess it is full, but they are taking a waiting list in case people bow out. So if you're interested in participating in that this year or even next year, you may want to be put on the waiting list. You'll be notified about our program next year. So as you close the Zoom today, you'll be asked for do evaluation, a quick evaluation. You'll be anonymous. Please share your comments about today's webinar and future webinars that you'd like to see with Fridays with the Forester. Here's some links that you might want to participate in. If you're not getting the My Minnesota Woods monthly newsletter from our forestry team and extension, you may want to do that. The Z-Link is z.umn.edu/mmw email. And then there's a link to the Minnesota Family Woodland Conference as well. And again, all of our recordings of Fridays with Forester are at our Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. Thanks again to Hannah and Angela for doing a great job today on participatory science. And thanks everyone for joining us today.